Part 18. Something had to be done, and fast, Macready knew. Maybe this was how it had started at the Norwegian camp. The thing didn't even have to show itself. All it had to do was let you know it was around. Complete paranoia would soon take control of the human survivors, and they'd reduce themselves to a manageable level. He wondered if the thing had a sense of irony, of humor, and decided it probably did not. Talk, he told himself. Say something. Say anything, but stay calm. Keep their minds working and their thoughts off shadowy suspicions. He stepped forward. Well, let's break this down logically. Who's got access to the lock? The refrigerators? Copper thought a moment. I guess I'm the only one with authorization, outside of Gary. The station manager nodded his agreement. And I've got the only key. That's regulations. He indicated the refrigerator. Drugs kept in there too. Eyes began to shift around to focus on the station manager, but no one voiced what their owners were thinking. Yet. Would that serum test really have worked? Macready asked the doctor. I think so. Wouldn't have suggested it if I didn't. I wasn't using it as a ploy to try to force this thing to reveal itself, if that's what you're driving at. Somebody else sure as hell thought it would work. Norris glared at his companions as he gestured at the ravaged refrigerator. If we needed any proof that it would have worked, we've got it now. Macready was still thinking. Who else could have used the key, Chief? No one that I can think of offhand. Gary replied slowly. Like I said, the doc and I are the only ones authorized to unlock that cold storage unit. I give the key to Copper when he needs something inside. It's safer that way. I'm beginning to wonder. The pilot glanced at Copper. Could anyone have gotten it away from you, Doc? I don't see how. When I'm finished with it, I return it to Gary right away. He smiled slightly. I'm always afraid I'll lose it or put it down someplace and forget what I did with it. Since it's the only key, I'm especially careful to see that Gary gets it back. When was the last time you used it? Copper shuffled his feet and stared at the floor as he tried to remember. A day or so ago, I guess. Gary began to notice the inquiring, suspicious eyes turned on him. I suppose it's possible someone might have lifted it from me. That keyring of yours is always hooked to your belt, Childs pointed out accusingly. Now how could somebody have gotten to it without you knowing? The station manager sounded uncharacteristically flustered. I suppose that when I was asleep. Look, I haven't been near that refrigerator. No one said anything. They continued to stare at the outpost's chief administrator. Sanders edged off into a corner, perspiring heavily. Copper's the only one who has any business with it, Gary added. The men's attention momentarily shifted to the doctor. Now wait a second, Gary. You've been in the infirmary on several occasions. Fuchs was trying to be rational amid a rising tide of panic. I think we can eliminate the doc from suspicion. He's the one who thought of the test. Maybe the thing would propose it just so we could reveal this. Norris pointed towards the refrigerator. And then turn suspicion away from itself. He was looking hard at Copper. Macready sounded doubtful. Unnecessary. Better not to propose the test at all. Fuchs is right. Would you have thought of it? The younger man shook his head. Human physiology isn't my field. So that leaves the doc out. For now, anyway. Because he thought this whole business up. So what? Childs looked like he wanted to torch something. Is that supposed to leave him in the clear? Bullshit! Maybe Norris is right. Maybe this thing's always gonna be 2 mental steps ahead of us. It'll keep us going around and around in circles, until sometime late at night, it decides to end it all by... An inarticulate moan rose from the back of the room. The men turned in time to see Sanders's back disappearing into the hallway. Everyone took off after him. Hey, Sanders! Gary shouted after the fleeing radio operator. Don't panic! We have to stay together. Get this figured out. It wants us separated. Sanders didn't stop or slow down. Just then, he wasn't thinking too straight. He wished fervently he was back home in Los Angeles, back at the university. Anywhere but where he was, trapped at the bottom of the world with a thing that could be your best friend. He sped along the corridors, opening doors ahead and slamming them in his wake. Shouts rose from behind. They were coming for him, the things. Maybe they'd all been taken over by now and they'd just been toying with him. Certimento, that was it. They'd been feasting on his fear, toying with him until the right moment came. Then they'd all gather around, all of them, trapping him helplessly in their midst. And as he watched, they would change. Thin white ropes would come out of them, like the dog, and they'd enter his hapless body while the men who weren't men anymore would smile down at him. Smile while something slipped into him and pushed Sanders aside, took over his brain and body, cell by cell by cell by... He was screaming as he burst into the little storage room. The glass case hanging on the near wall contained the guns that were allocated to the station. They'd been provided in case the men felt like doing some recreational shooting, or the biologists needed to bring down a specimen. Among the casually arrayed weapons were the 3 shotguns Macready, Bennings, and Childs had taken with them on their recent dog hunt. Now they were back in their slots, cleaned and ready for use next summer. Only summer was 6 long, black months away, and Sanders needed a gun now. He tried the case handle, found it locked. The clamour of approaching voices was louder now, accompanied by the pounding of many feet. Sanders looked wildly around the room and pounced on the heavy-duty stapler on the desk. The glass cracked with the 3rd blow, shattered at the 4th. He fumbled inside the case and extricated one of the shotguns, then a large box of shells. Frantically, he fought to load the single-barreled weapon. It was a 12-gauge, big-mouthed, and lethal. Powerful enough to stop even a thing at close range. His shaking hand yanked back the lid on the box and turned it over. Shells fell into his palm and bounced all over the floor. Somehow, he jammed one after another of the plastic-tipped bullets into the gun. The men arrived. Gary pulled out his omnipresent magnum and pointed it squarely at the radio operator. "Sanders, put that down right now!" Sanders looked up at him, his eyes wide. He was trembling violently. A shell fell from his fingers, bounced on the floor, and rolled over to Gary's feet. "No, I won't! I'll put this right through your head!" The station manager spoke slowly so that the radio operator would be sure to understand. The tip of the magnum never wavered. No one doubted Gary's sincerity. Sanders's gaze travelled past the station manager to the men grouped behind him in the corridor. "You guys gonna let him give the orders? I mean, he could be one of those things. What about the refrigerator lock?" He looked fearfully back at Gary. "How about it, man? How do you explain that away?" A few heads turned Gary's way, the shotgun momentarily forgotten. None of them were oblivious to the fact that Sanders just might be right. "Put the gun away!" the station manager said again. His tone was now soothing. "Just put the gun away, and then we'll talk about the refrigerator. But we can't talk as friends if we're all pointing guns at each other, can we? Please put it away, Sanders. I know how you're feeling. We're all confused. But we're also all in this together." "Not all of us," MacReady corrected him silently. "One of us is feeling very different." Sanders considered Gary's plea, the motionless magnum pointed at his head, the men waiting behind the station manager. He had to do something. Abruptly, he threw the remaining shells he held at the broken gun case. The men flinched instinctively, but none of the shells went off. Then the radio operator turned and leaned the gun carefully against the wall. He stood there a moment longer, his facial muscles working, and finally burst into tears. Knowles skated over and tried to comfort him. As the others watched, Gary slowly lowered his pistol, put it back in its holster. He inhaled deeply and turned to confront them. His tone was intense. "I don't know about copper, but I didn't go near that refrigerator. As you all damn well know, I don't use anything stronger than aspirin. But the doc said he'd seen you in the infirmary several times before," Childs reminded him. Gary turned slightly belligerent as he replied to the big mechanic. "Sure, I've been in there. I've also been out in the maintenance shed, even though I'm not a mechanic. I've been in the telecommunications room, though I don't work alongside Sanders. I've been in every corridor and room on this base. So have most of you. So what? That doesn't prove a damn thing. No one saw fit to contradict him. But I guess you'll all rest easier if someone else is in charge for a while. He pulled the gun from the holster and sized up the circle of anxious faces surrounding him. He finally settled on one. Can't see anyone objecting to you, Norris. Sorry, Chief. I respectfully decline. He grinned ruefully and patted his chest. Don't think I'd be up for it. Haven't been feeling too good lately. You guys know about my heart condition. I think you ought to appoint someone able to take a lot of strain, should the need arise. Childs reached for the gun. I'll take it. Macready beat him to it. No offense, Childs, but Norris's point about stability is well taken. Maybe it should be someone a bit more even-tempered. Childs glared at him, but didn't argue. Macready inspected his companions. Any objections? Fuchs didn't meet his eyes. Macready prodded him. Well, if you've got something to say, say it. This ain't the time to spare anybody's feelings. Fuchs spoke hesitantly. First Childs reached for the gun, then you, Mac. Both of you had been out, away from the camp. And you had contact with this thing. So did Bennings. Only Bennings didn't come back. He looked up, stared at the pilot. How do we know the thing didn't get to both of you? You don't. Nobody knows much of anything right now. Nobody will until we can find a way to test for this thing's presence. Somehow. He held the gun loosely. I'm not going to insist, though. Anybody else got a better suggestion? I'm open. Uncertain eyes roved through the group, each of them suspicious of his neighbor. Everyone came under scrutiny. There was no such thing as a close friend anymore. I guess you're as safe as anyone, Fuchs finally admitted. He ventured a conciliatory smile. I'm sorry, Mac. I had to say it. No hard feelings. I know how you feel. Okay, what now? Norris asked him. Macready considered. For one thing, we stick together. Let's get back to the rec room and try and talk it out. Everybody. And let's try and keep our emotions under control. Because when we don't... He glanced meaningfully at the still sobbing Sanders. That's when we play right into this thing's hands. Rampant fear of one's friends and neighbours did not make for a very genial atmosphere as they filed back into the recreation room and gathered around the centre table. But at least no one was pointing a shotgun or magnum at someone else. From what we know, Macready was declaiming, this thing likes to go one-on-one. Remember what Blair said about it taking an hour to complete a proper takeover? It likes to get you alone so it can work on you in private. Remember what happened to Bennings? Childs reminded the pilot. He was changing while we watched, and it took minutes, not an hour. Yeah, but it was a hurried job, and the thing never did break free of him. MacReady countered. It can make a mess in a few minutes, but to do it right takes longer. Childs considered that, nodded slowly in agreement. So we stick together, MacReady continued. As much as possible until we're sure it's safe. Nobody goes anywhere to do anything up to and including daily station maintenance unless he's accompanied by someone else. We do everything in 2s and 3s whenever possible. If we do have to split up, it should be for only a short time, and the guys involved should at least stay within sight and earshot of each other. Childs pointed to a corner where Gary, Clark, and the doctor had been isolated. I'll go along with that, Mac. But what do we do about those 3? We've got morphine, don't we? MacReady glanced over at Fuchs. Again, not my department, but I think we do, yes. Okay, we keep them loaded. Stash them here in the rec room with the lights on round the clock and watch 'em close. Palmer was suddenly alert. Morphine? He let his upper teeth hang over his lower lip and bugged his eyes. You know, I was pretty close to that dog too. MacReady and the rest ignored him. We should sleep in shifts, Norris suggested. Good idea, agreed the pilot. Half of us awake at all times. It shouldn't be too hard. It's nighttime outside 24 hours a day now anyway. That should keep anybody from crawling into anybody else's bed, or into anybody. Thanks to Knowles' reassuring chatter, Sanders had quieted down considerably. How are we going to try and find out who's who? That's the big question. MacReady looked over at Fuchs. You're our remaining link with biology. Can you think of any other tests we could try? Maybe something this thing wouldn't have thought of first, like it did with the serum business. Fuchs mulled it over. I'll give it a try. I could sure use Copper's help, though. You could 86 that thought right now, man, said Childs sharply. At least until we figure out who got into that refrigerator. Copper threw his accuser a hurt look. Also, MacReady went on, when this thing turns into itself, into its natural form, it turns slowly at first. It takes a while for the metamorphosis, Fuchs said. Thanks. Yeah, when it goes through that process, it takes it a while to finish. He looked over at Childs. Remember when it was trying to become itself and take Bennings at the same time? Childs found the constant reminder of the fight in the canyon discomforting. Yeah, I remember. It was twisting and jumping all over the place. Trying to get back into its own shape, MacReady said, nodding. Which looked to be a damn sight bigger than any human. That ties in with what Blair had to say about the thing's cell structure being flexible, being able to stretch or compact. I've got a hunch from what Childs and I saw that this thing in its natural form is a hell of a lot bigger than any dog or man. But it takes time to change, just like it does to take someone over. While it's still in the process of reverting, I think we can handle it. Like I said, Childs and I already did. Bennings didn't, murmured Norris. It surprised us, Macready argued. We weren't familiar with the surroundings and we didn't expect any kind of radical transformation. He slapped the table. This is our camp. It won't be easy to surprise us here. But if it ever reached full maturity and full power, based on what I saw at that Norwegian outpost, metal ripped apart, beams busted in half, well, I just don't know. If Blair's right and it needs an hour to take something else over, it probably needs close to that to achieve maturity. So no matter what anybody's doing, we all return to this room for a check every 20 minutes. Anybody's gone longer than that, we kill them. Kind of an extreme reaction, isn't it? Said Norris. Macready stared back at him hard. There's no reason for anybody who keeps his head to miss that deadline. Even Sanders nodded in agreement, having recovered his equilibrium. Better nobody stay in the can too long, he managed to quip. That'd be a hell of a place to die. There were a few weak laughs. Okay then. Macready turned to leave. We've still got things to do. This outpost ain't gonna run itself. No reason why we shouldn't get at it until Fuchs figures out another test.